When the final buzzer sounded on June 12, 1991, 20,000 people inside the Great Western Forum in Los Angeles lost their minds. Confetti rained down from the ceiling. Players jumped into each other's arms. Coaches grabbed each other and held on like they were afraid of falling. Fans who had driven hours to be there were crying into their hands without even knowing why. The Chicago Bulls had just won their first NBA championship. And in the middle of all that noise, in the middle of the greatest moment Chicago basketball had ever seen, Michael Jordan fell to his knees at center court, buried his face in both hands, and sobbed. Not performed, not posed for the cameras, just sobbed. Like a boy who had been carrying something unbearably heavy for a very long time and had finally been allowed to put it down. And it was the kind of moment that made people who had never watched a single basketball game in their lives stop what they were doing and feel something in their chest. But here is what the cameras did not show you. Here is what the broadcasters did not tell you. Here is what the newspapers the next morning got completely wrong. Because while everyone was watching the celebration, while the confetti was still falling, and the music was starting, and Magic Johnson was crossing the court with that big, generous smile of his, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something that only 3 people in that entire building were close enough to hear. Michael Jordan, still standing at center court, looked across the floor and saw him. Isiah Thomas. The man who had beaten him 3 years in a row. The man who had built an entire defensive system. They called it the Jordan Rules, specifically designed to make Michael's life miserable every time he touched the ball. The man whose Detroit Pistons had hit Michael so hard, so often, and with such obvious enjoyment, in that other teams took notes. Isiah was standing near half court in a suit. Not as an opponent tonight, just as a former champion, there to honor a moment that belonged to someone else. Michael walked toward him, slowly, directly, his eyes locked. He stopped 2 feet away, and he put out his hand. Open, steady, waiting. The arena, all 20,000 people, seemed to hold one single enormous breath. Isiah Thomas looked down at that hand. He looked at it for what people standing nearby later described as the longest 10 seconds they had ever personally witnessed inside a sports arena. And then, slowly, deliberately, without one single word, he turned around and walked away. The arena went silent, not gradually, all at once, like someone had reached into the building and switched off every sound in the world at exactly the same moment. Players froze. Coaches froze. Reporters stopped writing mid-sentence. The broadcasters upstairs lost their words completely, and Michael Jordan, his hand still in the air for just a half second longer than it needed to be, slowly lowered it. That image, Michael's open hand, Isiah's back already turned, 20,000 faces frozen behind them, ran on the front page of nearly every sports newspaper in the country the next morning. Why, everyone saw it. Everyone had an opinion about it. Everyone thought they understood what happened that night. But here is what nobody knew. Here is the part that stayed hidden for 20 years, kept quietly by a young sports journalist standing 4 feet away with an open notepad and a pen that suddenly stopped working, kept by a rookie player standing near the scorer's table with a towel over his shoulder, kept by a 12-year-old ball boy gripping a mop handle who couldn't believe what he had just heard. All 3 of them witnessed the same thing. All 3 of them heard the same 4 words. 4 words that Michael Jordan said quietly, not for the crowd, not for the cameras, barely even for himself, into an open microphone that someone had accidentally left on. 4 words that completely change everything you think you know about that night, about Michael Jordan, about Isiah Thomas, about what it really means to be great. Stay with us for the entire story, because by the time we are done, you will never look at that photograph. Michael's hand out, Isiah's back turned, the whole stadium frozen, the same way again. Before we get to the arena, before the silence, before the handshake that wasn't, before those 4 frozen words, you need to meet a boy. Not Michael Jordan, not yet. You need to meet Marcus Whitmore first, because Marcus is the thread. Pull him out and the whole story unravels. There is a place in Virginia called Chesapeake. Not the rich part of Chesapeake, somewhere where the lawns are green and the driveways are long and clean. The other part, the part that doesn't show up on postcards. In the summer, the heat there sits on everything like a wet blanket. The air smells like cut grass and motor oil and old wood. The streets are mostly quiet in the middle of the day because anyone sensible is inside, out of the sun. In the 1970s, in a small corner of the city that the locals called Bad News, there stood a house with a broken porch step and a TV antenna on the roof that tilted slightly to the left. Inside that house lived a woman named Darlene Whitmore. Darlene was the kind of woman who made hard look easy. She worked double shifts at a textile plant on the edge of town. She came home most nights smelling like machine oil and burnt coffee. And her feet hurt so badly some evenings that she had to sit for 10 minutes at the kitchen table before she could take her shoes off. But she always sat at that kitchen table. And every single night, before her children went to bed, she asked them all the same question. "What are you going to be?" Her youngest child, a skinny, long-legged boy named Marcus, always gave the same answer without blinking. "The best." He said it every time, not loud, not showing off, just calm and clear. The way you say something when you really believe it. Darlene would nod slowly, like she was filing it away somewhere safe. Marcus Whitmore grew up watching basketball on that small TV in the living room, and the antenna had to be tilted just right or the picture turned fuzzy and gray. Marcus would hold it in place for an entire hour, arms stretched above his head, perfectly still, just so his older brother could watch the game without it breaking up. He didn't complain. He just watched. He studied the players the way other kids studied superheroes, the way they moved, light on their feet even though they were big, the way they passed without looking, the way they could make their bodies do things that seemed to break the rules of what bodies were supposed to do. By the time Marcus was 11, he was at the park every single day after school. Rain or shine. Sometimes both. By 12, he was the best player on his block. By 13, boys 2 years older were asking him to be on their team. But here's the thing about Marcus that set him apart from every other kid who could play. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to understand why he won, or why he lost. He kept a battered notebook, the kind with the black and white speckled cover, where he drew out plays in blue ink, little circles for players, arrows for movement. He would watch a move on television, then go to the park and practice it for 3 hours straight until his hands knew it, without his brain having to think. His coach at Jefferson Middle School was a man named Coach Drummond. Coach Drummond had been teaching and coaching for so long that he had a permanent squint from years of watching games in bright afternoon sun. He had seen hundreds of kids come through his gym, good ones, bad ones, show-offs, quitters, naturals, and grinders. Marcus was something he hadn't seen too many times before. "You think too much," Coach Drummond told him one afternoon, half complaining and half admiring. Marcus bounced the ball once, then looked up. "I think about winning," he said. Coach Drummond had no answer for that. He just nodded and blew his whistle. Now then, here is where this story takes its first turn. Marcus Whitmore never made the NBA. He came close. He was good enough to dream about it seriously. But close and good enough don't get your name on a jersey. He grew up, got a job, lived a quiet life. Most people in his city couldn't have told you who he was. But Marcus had a cousin. And that cousin, a young man who grew up watching Marcus play in that park in Bad News, who learned what hard work looked like by watching Marcus hold that antenna in place for an hour, that cousin did make the NBA. His name was Raymond Whitmore, and Raymond was standing on the court on June 12, 1991, just a few feet from Michael Jordan, close enough to hear every word, when something happened that left 20,000 people unable to breathe. We will get to Raymond. We will get to that night. But not yet, because right now you need to understand where Michael Jordan came from. Not the commercials, not the trophies, not the highlight reels. The real beginning, the place where the fire was lit. Michael Jeffrey Jordan was born on February 17, 1963. His family moved to Wilmington, North Carolina, when he was still small. His father, James, worked long hours and came home tired but present. His mother, Dolores, was the kind of woman who could look you straight in the eye and make you feel like you owed her your absolute best. Not because she demanded it, but because she gave hers every single day, and it would have been embarrassing to do anything less. Michael grew up loving basketball the way most people love air, naturally, without thinking about it. It was just always there, always part of him. But here is the part of Michael Jordan's story that people forget, or maybe never knew. When Michael was 15 years old, he tried out for the varsity basketball team at Laney High School in Wilmington, and he got cut. Let that land for a moment. The boy who would one day be called the greatest basketball player who ever lived, the man who would win 6 championships, 6 finals MVP awards, 5 regular season MVP awards, could not make his high school team as a sophomore. He went home that afternoon and walked straight to his room. He didn't slam the door, he just closed it softly, and then he sat on the edge of his bed and cried. Not the kind of crying that's over in 2 minutes, the deep kind, the kind that starts in your chest and works its way up and won't stop until it's ready. His mother, Dolores, heard him through the door. She didn't knock. She didn't come in with cookies or comforting words. She just stood in the hallway and listened, and then quietly walked away. Because Dolores Jordan knew something that most parents are too nervous to accept. Some pain has to be felt all the way through before it can become something useful. She let her son feel it, and the next morning Michael Jordan got up before sunrise and went outside. And he started working all summer long, morning to night, before breakfast, after dinner, in the thick July heat, in the August thunderstorms that rolled in off the coast. He shot, he dribbled, he ran. He practiced moves he had seen on TV until they were as natural as breathing. He didn't talk about it. He didn't post about it. This was 1978. There was no posting. He just worked. Quietly, furiously, privately. The next year when tryouts came around, Michael Jordan didn't just make the team. He became the kind of player that made coaches from other schools nervous when they saw him warming up before a game. From that day forward, Michael Jordan carried that cut, that rejection, like a coal inside his chest. Always warm, always lit. Every time a game got hard, every time an opponent thought they had him figured out, he reached into that place and found the fire. He would never let anyone tell him he wasn't enough. Not again. But here is the part that matters most. The part that connects to everything that comes later. The part that connects to that night in 1991 and those 4 words that left the stadium frozen. The cut made Michael Jordan a champion, but it also made him someone who never forgot what it felt like to be on the outside. Someone who, deep down, even at the very top of his career, could still recognize that feeling in someone else's eyes. Even in the eyes of an enemy. Even in the eyes of the man who had just walked away from his hand. That understanding, that strange, unexpected well of empathy inside the most competitive man alive, is what this whole story is really about. And it started right here, in Wilmington, North Carolina, with a boy crying in his room, with a mother who was wise enough not to knock. If Michael Jordan's story starts with being cut from a team, with a door closed softly, a mother standing quietly in a hallway, and a boy crying into his pillow, then Isiah Lord Thomas III's story starts with something older and heavier than that. It starts with a father walking out the front door and never coming back. The west side of Chicago is not the kind of place people write postcards about. In the 1960s and 1970s, it was a neighborhood of cracked sidewalks and corner stores with iron bars on the windows and children who learned very early that the world was not going to hand them anything. Not one single thing. But it was also a neighborhood of something else, something that doesn't show up in news stories or statistics. It was full of people who loved each other with a fierceness that only comes from knowing how fast things can be taken away. Into this world on April 30th, 1961, Isiah Lord Thomas III was born. He was the youngest of 9 children, 9, all of them crammed into a house that was too small and a life that was too tight, and held together almost entirely by the will of one woman, Mary Thomas. Mary Thomas was short in height and enormous in everything else. She worked. She prayed loudly and often. She cooked meals that somehow stretched further than they had any right to. She kept her children fed and clothed and in school through conditions that would have broken most people twice over. And when Isiah was 3 years old, when he was still small enough to sit in her lap and fit entirely, his father left. No argument, no warning that anyone remembers. Just gone. Mary Thomas did not fall apart. She bent, the way a tree bends in a hard wind, deep and painful and real. But she did not break. She pulled her children closer. She worked harder. She prayed more. And Isiah, the youngest, the smallest, the one who had just barely started to understand what a father was. Isiah watched his mother. He watched her do impossible things with almost nothing. He watched her smile when she was exhausted. He watched her make decisions without anyone to lean on. He watched her carry weight that no single person should ever have to carry. And he watched her carry it without complaining. That got inside him, deep inside him, into the part of a person that doesn't have a name, but controls everything. It became the engine of how he played basketball. Isiah Thomas was not a big man. Standing just 6 feet tall, he was small by NBA standards. Small by standards of almost any professional sport. When he showed up to basketball courts as a kid, we older boys would look him over and assume they knew exactly what he was. They were wrong every single time, because Isiah didn't play small. He played like a man who had been told his whole life that he was too little, too poor, too young, and too much to handle, and had decided somewhere deep and permanent inside himself that every single one of those people was wrong. He was fast in a way that made defenders look foolish. He saw the court the way a chess player sees a board. Not just what was happening right now, but what was about to happen 3 moves ahead. He could pass through spaces that didn't look like spaces. He could hit a shot with a hand in his face and a clock running down and 20,000 people holding their breath. And he did it all with a smile. That smile. It was famous before he was. And big and warm and wide, the kind of smile you see on someone who is genuinely, completely happy. Except Isiah used it in the middle of the fiercest competition, when the game was brutal and the stakes were enormous. It made his opponents uncomfortable, because it said without words, "I am having the time of my life right now, and there is nothing you can do about it." He went to Indiana University and won a national championship playing for the legendary coach Bob Knight, a man so intense and demanding that some players wilted under him. Isiah did not wilt. He thrived. He left after 2 years for the NBA draft, and the Detroit Pistons took him second overall in 1981. He was 19 years old. He was ready. Detroit in the 1980s was a city in pain. The auto industry, the backbone of everything, was shrinking. Factories were closing. Neighborhoods that had once been full of working families were going quiet. People were scared and tired and looking for something to believe in. Isiah Thomas gave them something to believe in. He played every game like it was the last game he would ever play. He dragged his team back from deficits that looked hopeless. He made plays that replayed on highlight reels for years. And through all of it, that enormous smile never left his face. Detroit loved him back with the kind of love that only hurting cities can give. Fierce and total and permanent. His teammates called him Zeke. His opponents had other names for him. None of them were as friendly. Yeah, but now we have to talk about the other side of Isiah Thomas. Because he was complicated. All truly great people are. Isiah was loyal to his people the way a wall is loyal to the building it holds up. Solid and immovable, and completely without question. If you were inside his circle, he would do almost anything for you. He remembered birthdays. He showed up in hard times. He defended his teammates in public even when they were wrong. But if you were outside that circle, or worse, if you had once been inside it and crossed him, that same fire turned cold and sharp as a blade. He did not forgive easily. He did not forget at all. And so, when a young, electric, already famous Michael Jordan made a comment at a basketball camp in the early 1980s, something offhand about Isiah's size, about whether a man that small could really survive when the NBA got physical, Isiah Thomas did not yell. He did not argue. He did not make a scene. He just nodded. He smiled that big, warm smile, and he filed it away. Filed it in that deep, permanent place where proud people keep the things that hurt them, the things they plan to use later. From that moment on, every time the Bulls played the Pistons, it was never just a basketball game. It was a conversation between two men who had never learned to talk to each other. A conversation conducted in hard fouls and double teams, and late-game buckets and ice-cold stares across a painted hardwood floor. And for 3 straight years, 1988, 1989, 1990, Isiah Thomas won that conversation. He won it with the Jordan rules. He won it with his bad boys. He won it while smiling. And Michael Jordan, bruised, furious, brilliant, and beaten, kept score. Not just of the points, of everything. There is a man named Theodore Okafor. Most people have never heard of him. He was never on a poster. He was never on a trading card. His name was never announced over a loudspeaker to a roaring crowd. For 12 years, Theodore, who everyone called Teddy, worked as an equipment manager for the Chicago Bulls. He washed jerseys, he polished shoes, he taped ankles and carried bags and made sure the right socks were in the right lockers before every home game. He was in the building for everything. Teddy is retired now. He lives in a tidy house near Lake Michigan with a dog named Biscuit and a glass case mounted on the living room wall that holds 6 championship hats, one for each title he was there to see won. He doesn't give many interviews. He says he is a private man who had a front row seat to public history, and he likes to keep those two things separate. But a few years ago, he sat down with a writer and talked. Not about the games, not about the stats or the trophies or the highlight plays. He talked about the silences, about what he saw between the games, in the locker rooms and on the team buses, and in the dim, quiet hallways of arenas after everyone else had gone home. He talked about Michael Jordan, and what he said changes everything. People think Michael was always calm, Teddy said, leaning forward in his kitchen chair, like some kind of machine, perfect and cold and always in control. He shook his head slowly. He wasn't. After those Pistons losses, those playoff losses, he was something else entirely. It's hard to describe exactly. He didn't yell. He never threw things or kicked walls or screamed at anyone. He would just go quiet. And I'm telling you, that quiet was scarier than any yelling would have been. You could feel something happening inside him, like he was tearing himself apart and putting himself back together. Right there in the locker room, right in front of you. Teddy looked out his kitchen window at the lake for a moment. "Orna, I've thought about it for 30 years, he said, and I still don't have the right word for what that looked like. The closest I can get is rebuilding, like watching someone decide, quietly, completely, with everything they have, to become something that can't be stopped." Here are the facts of those years, cold and clear. The 1988 playoffs, Detroit beat Chicago. Michael scored brilliantly. It didn't matter. The 1989 playoffs, Detroit beat Chicago again, 4-2. Michael averaged 34 points per game. 34, and they still lost. The 1990 playoffs, Detroit beat Chicago again, 4-3. This time, Michael averaged 36 points. Sure, 36 points a game. Numbers that would make any other player in the league the undisputed hero of the series. They still lost. After the final game of the 1990 playoffs, a reporter pushed a microphone toward Michael in the post-game hallway and asked him what he planned to do differently next season. Michael looked at the reporter for a long, steady moment. The kind of look that makes a person wish they had asked a simpler question. Then he said one word: everything. He turned and walked away. He was not being dramatic. He was not making a speech or performing for the cameras. He was making a promise to himself in front of everyone. That summer, Michael Jordan went to work in a way that even people close to him found alarming. And he had always been fast. He had always been skilled. His hands and his feet and his eyes had always worked together in ways that seemed almost unfair. But the Detroit Pistons, with their hard fouls and their physical defense and their strategy of hitting Michael every single time he drove to the basket, had shown him something he hadn't wanted to see. Fast and skilled wasn't enough. He needed to be stronger. Not bigger exactly, but stronger. The kind of strong that means when someone hits you, you don't go down. You absorb it. You keep going. You make them wish they had never touched you. He worked with his trainer, a quiet, focused man named Tim Grover. Every single day that summer, he changed what he ate. He changed how long he slept. He changed the way he thought about his own body. Well, maybe by the time training camp opened that fall, Michael Jordan had rebuilt himself from the inside out. But there was something else, something that mattered even more than the physical work. Phil Jackson had been the Chicago Bulls head coach since 1989. He was not like other coaches. He had studied philosophy. He had read books about the way the mind works under pressure. He had spent years thinking about one specific question: how do you get 5 different people, 5 different personalities, 5 different egos, 5 different ideas about how the game should be played, to think and move and breathe as one? He had watched Michael Jordan lose to Detroit 3 years in a row. And he had noticed something that he believed was the real reason they kept losing. Not effort, not talent, not heart. Something else entirely. Phil Jackson called Michael into his office one afternoon in the summer of 1990. Just the two of them. No cameras, no teammates, no noise. He looked at Michael for a moment before he spoke. Then he said, "They're not just stopping you, Michael. They're using you against yourself." Michael didn't say anything. "The Jordan rules," Phil continued, leaning forward. "Think about what they really are. They're not just a defensive strategy. They're a psychological trap. They want you to feel like no one else on this team can save you. They want you to feel alone out there. So alone that you grab the ball and try to do everything yourself, every single possession, until your legs give out and your hands get heavy and you're too tired to do anything at all." He paused. "And then they beat you. Not because they're better, because you helped them." The room was very still. Michael Jordan sat with that for a long time. Then he nodded. Not the quick, polite nod of someone who has heard something and moved on. The slow, heavy nod of someone who has just been handed an answer to a question they have been carrying for years and now has to decide what to do with it. "Stop playing into it," Phil said simply. And this time, finally, after 3 years of beautiful, brilliant, heartbreaking failure, Michael really heard it. The 1990 to 1991 Chicago Bulls were different. Michael was different. He still scored, Lord did he score, and won his 5th straight league scoring title. But now he passed. Now he trusted. He fed Scottie Pippen on the wing. He set screens for Horace Grant. He found John Paxson in the corner and let him shoot the open shot instead of taking a harder one himself. The team ran something called the triangle offense. Phil Jackson had built it carefully over 2 seasons. A system where every player on the court always knew exactly where every other player would be. It required trust. It required selflessness. It required every man on the floor to believe that the team was bigger than any one person on it. Even Michael Jordan. Especially Michael Jordan. They were beautiful to watch that year. They moved like water, always finding the open space, always flowing toward the right place. Opponents who had game planned for Michael suddenly found Scottie Pippen destroying them. Opponents who shifted to stop Pippen found Horace Grant wide open under the basket. It was basketball played the way it was meant to be played, and when the playoffs arrived, when Detroit was waiting in the Eastern Conference Finals, just like every other year, something in the air felt different. You could feel it before the first tip-off. The Bulls felt it. The Pistons felt it. The 17,000 people in the arena for Game 1 felt it, even if they couldn't have explained exactly what it was. What they were feeling was this: the years of fire had finally become a flame that could be aimed. The Chicago Bulls swept the Detroit Pistons, 4 games, 0 losses. When the final buzzer sounded in Game 4, when it was over, truly over, the Detroit Pistons walked off the court. No handshakes, no acknowledgement. Isiah Thomas walked straight toward the tunnel with his eyes locked forward, moving past Michael Jordan, past Scottie Pippen, past Phil Jackson, past every Bulls player and coach and staff member standing on that court, as if none of them were there at all. The whole arena watched in stunned silence, Later, reporters asked Isiah about it. He gave a short answer about the nature of competition. He did not apologize. He walked away from the microphone the same way he had walked off the court. Michael said nothing publicly that night, but Teddy Okafor was in the locker room afterward. There he watched the celebration, the hugging and the shouting and the champagne that someone had brought in early, just in case. And in the middle of all that noise, he noticed Michael sitting alone at his locker, not celebrating, just sitting. Teddy walked over and asked quietly if he was okay. Michael looked up. His eyes were not angry. They were not triumphant. They were the eyes of someone working through something complicated and painful and real. He said 4 words. I just want to understand why. Not, I beat him finally. Not, did you see that? Not, we're going to the finals. I just want to understand why. Teddy Okafor has told that story many times in the years since. And every time he gets to those 4 words, he stops for a moment. Because he says they still give him chills. Not because they sound angry. Because they don't. Because in the middle of his greatest victory to that point, in the middle of the moment he had worked 3 brutal years to reach, Michael Jordan looked at the empty tunnel where his enemy had disappeared and felt something that had nothing to do with winning. He felt the need to understand another person. That feeling, quiet and unexpected and completely real, was the seed of everything that happened 2 months later, when the whole stadium froze, and those other 4 words came out. June 12, 1991, the Great Western Forum, Inglewood, California. Outside, the Los Angeles evening was warm and orange, the way California summer nights get just before the sun finally gives up and drops below the hills. Cars filled the parking lot for miles, vendors sold hot dogs and pennants and foam fingers. So police on motorcycles moved slowly through the crowd, watching. Inside the arena, 20,000 people pressed into their seats and made the kind of noise that you don't just hear. You feel it in your chest, low and constant, like the hum of something enormous coming to life. The Chicago Bulls needed 1 win. They had already won 3 games in this series against the Los Angeles Lakers. 1 more and it was over. 1 more and 45 years of waiting. 45 years of Chicago basketball with no championship trophy, no parade, no banner, would be finished. 1 more and Michael Jordan would have what he had been chasing his entire life. In the visitors' locker room, the noise from outside was muffled but present. A low roar pressing through the concrete walls like something alive trying to get in. The Bulls sat in front of their lockers in near silence. Nobody talked loud. Nobody joked around. Even the music that usually played before games had been turned all the way down. Some players taped their wrists. Some stretched slowly on the floor. Some just sat and stared at the carpet between their shoes. Michael Jordan sat in front of his locker with his eyes closed and his headphones on. Nobody knew what he was listening to. Nobody asked. Years later, long after the trophies were won and the parades were done and everything had settled into history, Michael sat down with a journalist named Priscilla Fontaine, who had spent nearly a decade trying to write a full biography of him. And the book was never published. But the interviews survived. And in one of them, Priscilla asked Michael what he was thinking about in that locker room in those final quiet minutes before the game. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I wasn't thinking about the Lakers." Priscilla waited. "I was thinking about my dad," Michael said. "He was out there in the stands. He'd flown in. He always flew in for the big ones. And I kept thinking, I'm about to go out there and try to win the most important game of my life. And the person I want to do it for more than anyone, more than myself, more than the city, is sitting out there right now in a seat watching the court and waiting for me." He paused again. "That was the whole thing," he said. "That was everything." James Jordan, Michael's father, the man who had built a basketball hoop in their backyard in Wilmington out of whatever materials he could find, the man who had never, not once in Michael's entire life, looked at his son and seen anything other than something extraordinary. That man was in the building, and Michael Jordan was going to win it for him. The game itself was something that people who were there still struggle to describe accurately. The Bulls played with a focused fury, calm on the surface, burning underneath, that made the Los Angeles Lakers look, at certain moments, like they were playing in a different, slower version of the same sport. Every Chicago possession felt purposeful. Every defensive rotation felt precise. The triangle offense hummed like a machine with every gear in its right place. Michael was everywhere, scoring, passing, defending, pushing the pace, finding the open man, taking over when taking over was required and stepping back when it wasn't. He finished the game with 30 points, 10 assists, and 6 rebounds. Those numbers, for someone who was also the best defender on the court most of the night, are almost impossible to make sense of. When the final buzzer sounded and the scoreboard read, Chicago 108, Los Angeles 101, the arena erupted. Bulls players leaped from the bench. Coaches grabbed each other. The crowd, a Los Angeles crowd, a crowd that had come hoping to see their Lakers win, rose to its feet anyway, because some moments are bigger than rooting interests. And in the middle of all of it, Michael Jordan did something that surprised everyone. He collapsed, not from pain, not from exhaustion. He just folded. His knees hit the hardwood at center court, and he stayed there, doubled over, his face buried in both hands. His shoulders were shaking. He was crying. Not the quick, self-conscious kind of crying that athletes allow themselves in public when they know cameras are watching. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere so deep inside a person that it doesn't ask permission before it comes out. His teammate, a big, powerful forward named Horace Grant, saw him first. Horace ran over and dropped down beside him and wrapped both arms around him and held on. He didn't say anything. He didn't try to lift Michael up or calm him down or tell him to compose himself for the cameras. He just held him. Yet for people watching at home, people who had never watched a basketball game in their lives, who had stumbled onto the broadcast by accident or turned it on because someone in their house asked them to, started crying too. Because you didn't need to understand the game to understand what that moment was. You just needed to be human. That was a man who had worked for everything he had, who had been knocked down and got back up so many times that the getting back up had become its own kind of art, who had carried a fire inside him since he was 15 years old and sitting on the edge of his bed crying because someone told him he wasn't good enough. He was good enough. He had always been good enough. He knew it now for certain. Then came the formalities. The Lakers were gracious in the way that great teams can sometimes be gracious even in heartbreak. Magic Johnson, the enormous, generous, incomparably warm Magic, crossed the court and wrapped Michael in a hug and whispered something into his ear. Magic's own eyes were red. He had wanted this badly. His team had wanted it badly. But Magic Johnson had been raised to be bigger than his own pain when the moment required it. He was bigger than it. The two teams shook hands. It was respectful and real. And then the NBA, as it sometimes did in those years, had arranged something extra for the occasion. A symbolic ceremony where a group of former champions would come onto the court to congratulate the new ones. Like a passing of the torch, a moment of history acknowledging history. The group came out from near the tunnel. Michael was still near center court, Horace's arm still loosely around his shoulder when he saw them. And then he saw him, standing near the half-court line, in a suit, arms at his sides, Isiah Thomas. Not as an opponent tonight, not wearing a Pistons uniform or carrying the weight of the Jordan rules, or backed up by the bad boys. Just a man in a suit, standing on a court that belonged to someone else, representing a basketball community that was here to honor a moment. Their eyes met across the painted floor. 20,000 people were still making noise. Cameras were still flashing. Confetti was still drifting down from the rafters in slow spirals. But in that one locked second between those two sets of eyes, everything else went slightly distant, slightly muted. Something passed between them, something old and complicated and heavy. The cameras caught it but couldn't name it. The broadcasters in the press box saw it and went briefly quiet, which for broadcasters is unusual enough to mean something. Then Michael Jordan began walking toward Isiah Thomas, slowly, directly, his eyes never leaving the other man's face. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at Isiah, and he extended his hand. Open, steady, waiting. This is the moment that the title promised you. the moment that stopped time. Isiah Thomas looked down at Michael Jordan's hand. He looked at it for what the people standing nearest them later described as the longest 10 seconds they had ever personally witnessed in a sports arena. Then, slowly, deliberately, without a word, without a glance, without a single change in his expression, Isiah Thomas turned around and walked away. The arena went silent, not gradually, not in waves the way noise usually fades. All at once, like someone had reached up and turned a switch. 20,000 people. One single moment, zero sound. The cameras swung wildly to follow Isiah. The broadcasters stumbled over their own sentences and stopped. Players and coaches and reporters and staff all froze in place like a photograph had been taken of the entire building. And Michael Jordan, his hand still raised for half a second longer than it needed to be, fingers still open, arms still extended toward the empty space where Isiah had been, slowly lowered it. He stood there. The confetti kept falling, because confetti doesn't know what just happened. And then Michael Jordan turned slightly toward the sideline, toward a small courtside microphone mounted on the scorer's table that a sound technician had left open by accident or by fate or by whatever force arranges the moments that matter. And he said something, quietly, almost to himself. Cordell Briggs, the young sports journalist with the open notepad, was standing exactly 4 feet away. He heard every single word. He did not write them down that night. He would carry them for 20 years before he finally told anyone. Hold on, we are almost there. By the next morning, the image was everywhere. Not just in Chicago, not just in Detroit, everywhere. It was on the front page of newspapers in cities that didn't even have NBA teams. It was the first thing playing on the television sets in diners and barbershops and waiting rooms across the entire country. Sports radio programs that usually started their morning shows with cheerful music and score rundowns opened instead in near silence. Hosts sitting in their booths, staring at the photograph, trying to figure out where to begin. The photograph was simple. That was part of what made it so powerful. Michael Jordan's arm extended, his hand open, his eyes looking directly at the man in front of him. Isiah Thomas's back, already turned, already walking away, his shoulders square, his chin up, unbothered, or performing unbothered, which in a moment like that amounts to almost the same thing. And behind both of them, slightly blurred but unmistakable, 20,000 faces, all wearing the exact same expression. My shock, pure, unfiltered, open-mouthed shock. The opinions came fast and they came loud. A retired player named Gerald Washington, a big barrel-chested center who had played for 3 different teams in the 1970s and was now a regular voice on a morning sports radio program in Detroit, did not wait for his second cup of coffee before going on air. What Isiah Thomas did last night, Gerald said, his voice rising before he was halfway through the sentence, was a disgrace, a flat-out disgrace to this game, to these players, and to every fan who stayed up late to watch a championship moment. Michael Jordan won. You shake his hand. That is what you do. That has always been what you do. I don't care what history those two men have. I don't care what was said in private or what happened 10 years ago at some basketball camp. You shake the man's hand. Full stop. He got a lot of calls that morning. Almost all of them agreed with him. The newspaper columns were just as sharp. Words like classless, bitter, small, sore loser, a disgrace to sportsmanship. Several writers used a phrase that would follow Isiah Thomas for years afterward. The worst moment in NBA history that didn't involve a foul. Isiah's defenders were quieter. There were fewer of them, and they were swimming against a very strong current. A handful of players, people who had been in locker rooms with both men, who had watched the rivalry up close from the inside, tried to point out that the story was more complicated than a single photograph. They said that Michael Jordan, over the years, had worked quietly but deliberately to keep Isiah off the Olympic team. That Michael had made his feelings about Isiah known to league officials, to teammates, to coaches, not in press conferences, but in the private conversations that shape careers. That what the world was calling Isiah's cruelty might also be read as a man who had been pushed to his limit and finally publicly pushed back the only way he had left. They weren't wrong, but they were fighting against the image, and the image was a wall. Here is what the image did not show. It did not show what happened in the 4 seconds after Isiah walked away. It did not show Michael Jordan lowering his hand slowly. Not quickly, not with the snap of someone embarrassed and wanting to move on. Slowly, like a man setting something down carefully because he didn't want to break it. It did not show his face in that moment. Every camera had already swung to follow Isiah. It did not carry the sound. Because here is the thing that almost nobody knew. Not the columnists, not the radio hosts, not the millions of people who formed their opinions before breakfast the next morning. The television broadcast had cut away. The main microphones had already gone quiet. The on-court audio that would have captured anything said near the scorer's table was considered background feed, used for atmosphere, almost never recorded cleanly. Almost never. But on that night, a young sound technician named Bo Calloway, 23 years old, and working only his second NBA Finals, slightly overwhelmed by the chaos of the celebration and the noise and the confetti and the cameras, had left one of the courtside microphones open by mistake. A small technical mic mounted at the edge of the scorer's table, used normally to pick up the sounds of the game itself. The squeak of sneakers, the thud of the ball, the close-up grunt of a player fighting through a screen. He forgot to close it, and so it sat there, open, alive, pointing directly at the spot where Michael Jordan was standing. 3 people in that building were close enough to hear what came out of it. The first was Cordell Briggs, a young sports journalist, 26 years old, on only his 3rd NBA Finals assignment, standing 4 feet from the scorer's table with a notepad in his left hand and a pen in his right. And the second was Raymond Whitmore, Marcus Whitmore's cousin, the rookie backup point guard, standing with a white towel draped over his shoulder near the sideline, close enough to the court that he could have reached out and touched the scorer's table if he'd wanted to. The third was a 12-year-old boy named Sergio Delgado, who had been given a mop by a building staff member and told to stand near the sideline in case of spills. He had not mopped anything all night. He had just stood there, barely believing he was allowed to be so close to something so big. All 3 of them heard the same thing. All 3 of them in interviews given years apart, in different cities to different people, with no way of having coordinated their stories. Told the exact same version, the same 4 words, almost the same pause before them, on almost the same description of Michael's voice when he said them. Quiet, directed at no one in particular. The tone not of a man making a statement, but of a man thinking out loud and forgetting, for just one unguarded second, that the world was watching. But we are not there yet. Before those 4 words can mean what they truly mean, you need to understand what happened to both men in the years that followed that night. Because the full weight of what Michael Jordan said, and why he said it, only makes sense once you know what those years cost both of them. What they lost, what they found, and what one of them quietly did for the other when nobody was looking. This is the part of the story that has never been told. Not on any radio program, not in any newspaper column, not in any documentary, until now. Time is a strange thing. It moves fast when you are happy and slow when you are hurting, and it moves differently for different people, even people standing in the same room, living through the same years, breathing the same air. After June 12, 1991, time moved differently for Michael Jordan and Isiah Thomas. It moved the way it always moves for people who have had a defining moment. The kind of moment that splits a life into before and after. The kind of moment that you will still be thinking about when you are old and quiet, sitting somewhere alone, watching the light change through a window. Both men lived inside that moment for the rest of their lives, just in very different ways. For Michael Jordan, must the years after 1991 looked, from the outside, like a story of pure and unstoppable triumph. He won the championship again in 1992, and again in 1993, 3 years in a row. The whole city of Chicago lived on a kind of permanent, floating joy that those years brought. Parades and banners and the kind of civic pride that makes strangers on the street nod at each other and smile for no particular reason. Then in the fall of 1993, Michael Jordan walked away. He retired. He was 30 years old. He was the best basketball player alive. He was at the absolute peak of everything, and he walked away. The official reason he gave was that he had lost his love for the game, that the hunger had faded, that he needed something new. Most people accepted that explanation because they didn't have another one. But the people who were closest to Michael, who sat with him in the months that followed the announcement, who saw what he looked like in private when the cameras were gone, knew the real reason. His father was dead. James Jordan had been murdered on July 23, 1993. He had pulled over to rest on a highway in North Carolina and was robbed and shot while he slept in his car. He was 56 years old, the man Michael had won that first championship for. The man in the stands in Los Angeles, the man whose pride had been the fuel underneath everything Michael had ever done on a basketball court. Gone. Michael Jordan, the man who had turned pain into fuel his entire life, had never faced pain quite like this. This was not the pain of being cut from a team. This was not the pain of losing a playoff series. This was the kind of pain that doesn't build you up. It just hollows you out and leaves you standing in a place you don't recognize, wondering who you are without the person who believed in you first. He spent the next year and a half playing minor league baseball, a sport his father had loved deeply. People laughed. Columnists wrote pieces about how sad it was to watch a great man embarrass himself on a baseball diamond. They missed the point entirely. Michael wasn't trying to be a baseball player. He was trying to be close to his father. He was trying to find him in something his father had loved. He came back to basketball in March of 1995, then won 3 more championships, 1996, 1997, 1998, 6 titles in total, 2 separate three-peats. A body of work so complete and so dominant that the argument about the greatest player in the history of the sport became, for most people, less of an argument and more of a statement of fact. But the man who came back from the baseball years was not the same man who had left. Something in Michael Jordan had softened, not weakened. He was still the most competitive person most people had ever been in a room with, but something in the very center of him had changed. Some hard locked door had been opened by grief and left slightly ajar. He thought about things differently. He felt things more openly, and he began, slowly, privately, to revisit certain memories, certain moments, certain people, including Isiah Thomas, including the handshake, and including the question he had asked Teddy Okafor in a quiet locker room after the Detroit sweep. I just want to understand why. For Isiah Thomas, the years after 1991 were harder and less kind. He won 1 more championship with Detroit in 1992, but the team was already aging, already coming apart. By 1994, his playing career was over. He moved into coaching and team management. Some of it worked briefly and well. Most of it was a long, difficult education in how quickly the world forgets what you did when you were great, and how long it remembers what you did wrong. The image of his back turning, his hand refusing, followed him everywhere. To every press conference, to every introductory meeting with new players, went into every conversation where someone was deciding whether to trust him. He handled it publicly with the same pride he had always shown. He didn't apologize often. He didn't explain himself in the way that people wanted him to. He carried it the way he had carried everything in his life, straight-backed and forward-facing, with a jaw set like something carved from stone. But privately, away from the cameras and the microphones and the judgments of people who had not been in that arena and had not felt what he felt that night. Privately, Isiah Thomas did something that almost nobody saw. He went home. Not to Detroit, not to Indiana, where he had gone to college, not to any of the cities where his career had taken him. He went back to the west side of Chicago, to the neighborhood where a woman named Mary Thomas had raised 9 children with almost nothing and enormous love, and the unshakable belief that her children would amount to something. To the streets where he had first learned what it meant to fight for everything you had. To the place where he had grown up understanding that the world was not going to give you anything. But that didn't mean you had nothing to give. He started a foundation, small, quiet, completely without fanfare. No press release, no announcement, no photo opportunity with a big novelty check, just money and time and showing up in person in a gymnasium or a community center or a library, to sit in a plastic chair across from a kid who needed someone to look at them and say, "I see you. I know where you come from. I know what this feels like. I made it out. Oh, you can too." A woman named Dr. Adas Okonkwo ran the community center on the west side, where Isiah's foundation did much of its work. She is a careful woman, a person who chooses her words slowly and says exactly what she means, and never more than that. She talked about Isiah Thomas with that same carefulness. "People know the version of him that the television made," she said. "The one who walked away from the handshake. The controversial one. The complicated one. But that man, the one they think they know, is not the man who showed up here. The man who showed up here sat in that gymnasium for 3 hours one Tuesday afternoon, listening to a 12-year-old boy sob about his father being in prison. He didn't rush the boy. He didn't try to fix it with words. He just sat there. And when the boy finally ran out of tears, Isiah Thomas looked at him and said 4 quiet words. Dr. Okonkwo paused. He said, 'I know that feeling.'" She looked at her hands for a moment. "And the boy believed him," she said, "because it was true." Korktum, tumtrumano wananom, mersamim, kerfonen. 2 men, 2 very different roads through the same years. One road lit by championship banners and global fame, and a grief so large it temporarily swallowed him whole. One road quieter and harder, paved with a reputation that wouldn't stop following him, and a generosity that almost nobody thought to look for. Both roads, it turned out, were heading toward the same question. The one that had been hanging in the air since the night the stadium froze. The one that was about to be answered. Finally, completely. In a way that would change how everyone understood what they thought they already knew. Almost there. Just a little further. There is a gymnasium in Indianapolis, Indiana, that smells like old rubber and floor wax, and the particular kind of sweat that only comes from children working hard at something they care about. The ceiling is low. The lights buzz slightly when the building gets warm. The bleachers on the north wall have one broken plank on the 3rd row that has been broken for so long that the kids who use this gym have stopped noticing it. A man named Raymond Whitmore has been coaching basketball in this gymnasium for over 20 years. He is not tall. He is not especially broad. He does not walk into a room and make people stop what they are doing to look at him. If you pass Raymond on the street, you would not know that he once played in the same league as Michael Jordan. You would not know that he once stood close enough to the greatest basketball player alive to hear him breathe. You would not know that Raymond Whitmore has been carrying a secret for most of his adult life. A small secret. 4 words long. The kind of secret that doesn't feel dangerous, just heavy. The kind that gets heavier every year you carry it, not because it grows, but because you begin to understand more and more what it means. Raymond Whitmore played 4 seasons in the NBA as a backup point guard. He was good, genuinely good. His handle was clean, his basketball IQ was high, and he understood his role better than most players twice his experience. Oh, but he was not great, not in the way that the very top of the league demands, and Raymond was always honest enough with himself to know the difference. He retired at 29. No dramatic announcement, no farewell tour. He just stopped getting invited back, the way it happens for most players who live at the edge of the roster. One summer, the calls stopped coming, and Raymond Whitmore packed his life into a car, drove to Indianapolis, and started the next part. He became a youth basketball coach. He is still that. He will probably always be that. His players love him, not with the distant love that children feel for famous people they have never met, but the close, complicated love they feel for someone who actually sees them, who shows up, who holds them to a standard and believes they can meet it. He carries himself with the quiet dignity of a man who made peace with not being famous and discovered somewhere in that peace something worth more. But Raymond Whitmore was in that arena on June 12, 1991. He was a rookie, 22 years old, standing near the scorer's table with a white towel over his left shoulder, watching the greatest moment his sport had ever produced unfold directly in front of him. He was not playing in the finals. He had been brought to the court as part of the team's extended traveling roster. He was there because basketball put him there, and he understood that this was an extraordinary gift, and he tried to take in every single detail. He saw everything, including what happened after Isiah walked away, including what Michael said. Raymond kept it for 20 years. He is specific about why. But I was afraid, he told a podcast called The Unwritten Game, hosted by a retired sports writer named Candace Farrell. Candace had been tracking down witnesses to that night for almost 3 years before Raymond finally agreed to sit down and talk. I was afraid that people would hear my name and think, who is this person? Why is some backup point guard nobody remembers suddenly claiming he heard something important that nobody else heard? They would think I was trying to attach myself to a famous story to make myself feel more significant. And I couldn't stand that idea, because I'm not significant in this story. I want to be clear about that. I am nobody in this story. He paused. But the story is somebody, he said. The story matters. And I was the one who heard it. And so eventually I figured out that staying quiet was its own kind of wrong. Candace Farrell let him take his time. She had been a sports writer for 22 years and had learned the hard way through years of rushing people and getting half stories that the most important thing an interviewer can do is stop talking. She stopped talking. And Raymond Whitmore, in the quiet of a recording studio that smelled faintly like coffee and old carpet, finally told it. After Isiah walked away, Raymond said slowly, the building just died. He stopped, seemed to search for a better word, decided there wasn't one. Died, all of it. 20,000 people. The music, the announcers, everything, just gone. Oh, like someone reached up and pressed a button and turned the whole arena off. He leaned forward slightly in his chair. And I'm standing there, maybe 10, 12 feet from Michael Jordan, and I can see his face clearly. And here is what I need you to understand. Here is the thing I have never been able to stop thinking about in 20 years of thinking about it. He did not look angry. Raymond shook his head slowly. He didn't look humiliated. He didn't look like a man who had just been publicly disrespected in front of the whole world on the greatest night of his career. He looked like something else entirely. Something I didn't have a word for when I was 22 years old, standing there with a towel on my shoulder. He sat back. I have a word for it now. He looked relieved. Like a man who had just been handed the answer to a question he had been carrying around for a very long time and didn't know how to put down. Candace waited. And then, Raymond said, his voice dropping slightly, he leaned toward the scorer's table. Just a small lean, the way you lean towards something when you want to be close to it. And there was this microphone there. One of those small technical mics they mount on the table for in-game audio, picking up the sounds of the game itself. It was still open. Nobody had closed it yet. He looked at his hands for a moment. And Michael Jordan said something. Quiet, not performing it for anyone, not making a statement. More like thinking out loud. Like the words were already in his head and they just came out because there was nothing left to hold them in. Candace Farrell, 20 years of professional interviewing behind her, held her breath. He said 4 words, Raymond said. Then he said them. I hope he's okay. The recording has a long silence after that. Nearly 8 seconds. Raymond just sitting there. Candace just sitting there. The faint sound of the building's ventilation system somewhere in the background. Then Raymond spoke again, quieter than before. I've turned those 4 words over in my mind more times than I can count, he said, because they don't fit the Michael Jordan that the world thinks it knows. The Michael Jordan of the commercials and the documentaries and the stories people tell about how ruthless he was, how he destroyed people, how he held grudges all the way to the end. That Michael Jordan would have been furious or satisfied or coldly, quietly triumphant. And he would have looked at Isiah's back and thought, good. Now everyone knows. But that's not what I saw. What I saw was a man at the very top of his life. The best night he had ever had. The thing he had worked for since he was 15 years old, crying in his bedroom. And in the middle of all that, he looked at the man who had just walked away from his hand and felt something for him. He wasn't angry at Isiah Thomas, Raymond said. He was worried about him. Another pause, shorter this time. Because Michael Jordan looked at Isiah Thomas walking away and recognized something in those squared shoulders and that straight spine and that refusal to look back. Raymond's voice was very quiet now, almost careful. He saw someone carrying something too heavy to put down, he said. He saw someone in pain. And Michael Jordan, the greatest competitor who ever played this game, looked at his enemy in pain and felt the thing that we are all supposed to feel for each other. He stopped. He felt concern, Raymond said. Simple, human concern. For the man who had just humiliated him. Candace Farrell later wrote that in 22 years of interviewing people for a living, that was the moment she came closest to losing her professional composure entirely. She held it together, but only barely. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from knowing something true that the world has decided it does not want to hear. Cordell Briggs lived inside that loneliness for 20 years. He is a tall man, a slightly stooped now, the way tall men sometimes get when they have spent decades leaning over desks and notepads and press row tables that were never quite built for someone his height. He has the careful, measured way of speaking that 31 years of professional writing will give a person, the habit of choosing each word like he is picking it up, weighing it, and deciding whether it is precisely the right one before he sets it down. He retired from sports journalism in 2018. In his career, he covered 6 NBA Finals, 4 Super Bowls, 2 Olympics, and more regular season games than he ever bothered to count. He interviewed Hall of Famers and journeymen. He sat across from coaches who became legends and coaches who became cautionary tales. He wrote about triumph and failure and scandal and redemption and all the complicated human territory that lives between those things. He says without hesitation that the story he never wrote was the hardest thing he ever carried. Harder than anything he did write. Harder than the stories about players who lost everything. Harder than the columns about careers cut short by injury. Harder even than the piece he spent 8 months writing about a young basketball player from Alabama who died before he was 25. The story he never wrote was 4 words long, and it has kept him up at night on and off for 2 decades. Cordell Briggs published a memoir in 2022. It is not a famous book. It did not make any bestseller lists. It was reviewed in a handful of sports publications and one literary journal that covers books about athletic history, and it was generally described as thoughtful and quietly moving. The chapter that got the most attention, by far, was the one about June 12, 1991. He called it simply, The 4 Words. He wrote it the way he wrote everything, carefully, without drama, with the precise, unhurried attention of a man who has spent his whole life trying to get things exactly right. Here is what he said. I was 26 years old. It was my 3rd NBA Finals. I was still young enough to be genuinely amazed that I was allowed to be there, that this was my job, that someone was paying me to stand courtside at the greatest sporting events in the world and write down what I saw. My notepad was open, my pen was in my right hand. Now I had written the final score at the top of the page. Chicago 108, Los Angeles 101. And I was waiting for something quotable, the way reporters always wait, scanning the court for the right face at the right moment. I saw Michael collapse. I wrote that down. I saw Horace Grant hold him. I wrote that down. I watched Magic Johnson cross the court and embrace his opponent with genuine warmth. And I wrote that down too, because that is the kind of thing that deserves to be written down. And then I saw Isiah Thomas, standing near half court in a suit, arms at his sides, expressionless in a way that told you immediately that the expression was costing him something. I watched Michael walk toward him. I watched the hand go out, and then I watched Isiah Thomas turn and walk away. I stood there with my pen ready and nothing came out of it, because for the first time in 3 years of professional reporting, I had no words for what I had just witnessed. The arena went silent. Every camera in the building swung toward Isiah's back. The broadcasters upstairs lost their sentences. And Michael Jordan lowered his hand. I was 4 feet away. My notepad was open. My pen was ready. And then he leaned slightly toward the scorer's table, and he said something, not loud, not for anyone in particular. The way a person says something when they have forgotten, for just one moment, that they are in public. And I put my pen down. Not because I didn't hear it. I heard it perfectly clearly, every word. I put my pen down because I didn't know what to do with it. No, because what he said did not fit inside any story I knew how to write. It did not fit the headline that was already forming in every press box in the building. It did not fit the narrative that would be on every sports page by morning. It did not fit the world's understanding of who Michael Jordan was. This cold, driven, unforgiving competitor who turned every slight into fuel and never once let an enemy rest easy. What he said fit a different story entirely. A story I was not sure anyone was ready to read. Cordell went home that night to a hotel room in Los Angeles and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without turning on the television. Then he opened his notepad. He wrote 30 drafts of the story over the next several days. He saved none of them. Each one felt like it was pushing the words into a shape they did not naturally want to hold. The problem, he wrote in his memoir, was not that the words were unclear. They were completely clear. He had heard them with total precision. He had written them in his notebook within seconds of hearing them, in the small, careful letters he always used when he wanted to make sure he would be able to read something back later. The problem was that the words were too quiet for the moment they lived inside. The world wanted noise. The world wanted conflict. The world had just watched one of the most dramatic public snubs in the history of professional sports, and it wanted a story with hard edges and clear villains and someone to be angry at over breakfast. And what Cordell Briggs had in his notebook was none of those things. What he had was 4 words that pointed, quietly and unmistakably, in exactly the opposite direction. The story everyone was writing, he said in an interview the year his memoir came out, was about pride. 2 proud men. One of them wins. One of them refuses to acknowledge it. Pride on one side, pride on the other. That story makes sense. It is satisfying in the way that clean, simple stories are satisfying. But the story I had in my notebook was about something that pride is supposed to make impossible. It was about one man at the peak of his triumph, feeling something tender and human toward the man who had just publicly rejected him. That story doesn't fit on a back page. That story doesn't make for a good radio argument. That story asks something of the reader that most readers, in that moment, were not ready to give. So I kept it. I kept it for 20 years. And I kept asking myself when the right time would be to tell it, and the answer kept being, not yet, not yet, not yet. He paused during that interview. A long pause, the kind that a good interviewer knows not to fill. Then he said, I think now is the right time. He opened his original notebook from that night, the small, spiral-bound one with the bent cover that he had carried to every game for 15 years. And he found the page. June 12, 1991. The score at the top, a few quick observations in the margin, the names of players he wanted to find afterward for quotes. And there, near the bottom of the page in letters slightly smaller and more careful than everything else around them, as though even his handwriting understood that this needed to be treated differently, were 4 words. He read them out loud during the interview, very quietly. MJ, I hope he's okay. Just that. No explanation around them. No follow-up observation. No attempt to process or interpret or frame what he had just heard. Just the words and the date, sitting there in that notebook for 20 years like a seed that had been waiting, patiently and without complaint, for the right season to become something. That season, Cordell Briggs decided, was now. This is the part of the story that nobody knows. Not the columnists who wrote thousands of words about that night. Not the documentary filmmakers who have picked over every inch of that era. Not the podcasters and the bloggers and the historians of the game who have spent years building complete timelines of the Jordan-Thomas rivalry. Nobody knows this part, because the only people who do know it are a retired community center director on the west side of Chicago, a backup point guard who coaches youth basketball in Indianapolis, and a woman who runs a small podcast about forgotten sports stories out of a converted spare bedroom in Atlanta. And because none of them spoke about it publicly until very recently, and because the person at the center of it, the person who received what arrived that day, never confirmed it and never denied it. He just folded it carefully, put it in his jacket pocket, and carried it. The way proud people carry things they are not ready to put down. It was 1994. The world had already moved on from the handshake, or moved forward anyway. The way the world always moves forward, whether or not the people inside a story are ready for it to. Michael Jordan had retired. Isiah Thomas was still playing, but the Detroit Pistons were no longer the team they had been. The Bad Boys era was finished. The dynasty was over. And in a small, tidy office in a community center building on the west side of Chicago, a building with a leaky ceiling in the back hallway and a mural on the outside wall painted by neighborhood children 3 summers before, a woman named Dr. Adashi Okonkwo was going through the morning mail. Dr. Okonkwo had been running this community center for 7 years. She was not the kind of person who impressed easily or softened things she meant to say clearly. She had a doctorate in education. She had turned down 2 better-paying jobs to stay in this neighborhood because she believed, with a practical and unromantic certainty, that this was where she was supposed to be. She had been working alongside Isiah Thomas's foundation for 2 years. She respected what it was doing. She was not a person who needed to admire someone to work productively with them, but she had come, quietly and without making a fuss about it, to admire Isiah Thomas in the specific way you admire people who show up without cameras and do hard things without an audience. That morning, among the envelopes in the mail pile, there was one that had no return address, just a name, just the foundation's address, handwritten. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, the kind that comes from someone who learned to write carefully and never forgot how. Inside was a single sheet of plain white paper. No letterhead, no official seal, no typed text, just handwriting. The same careful, deliberate handwriting as the envelope. Dr. Okonkwo read it once. Then she set it down on her desk and sat very still for a moment. Then she picked it up and read it again. Then she walked down the hall to where Isiah Thomas was sitting in the gymnasium, going over some budget paperwork with one of the program coordinators, and she told him there was something he needed to see. He followed her back to her office. She handed him the letter. He took it, and he read it. And Dr. Adazi Okonkwo, a woman who had run this center through budget crises and neighborhood violence and city funding cuts and every other hard thing a community institution has to survive, said she had never seen Isiah Thomas look the way he looked in that moment. She could not fully name what was on his face. It was not quite surprise. It was not quite relief. It was something more complicated and more private than either of those things. Something that, she said, felt like it belonged to him alone, and she was only seeing it by accident. He said he could not read it alone. He asked her to read it again, out loud. She did. According to Dr. Okonkwo, whose account was passed to Raymond Whitmore and then to Candace Farrell, the letter said approximately this: Isiah, I heard about some of the work you are doing on the West Side. My cousin told me. I wanted to write and say, I respect it. I know we have never been friends. I know there is a lot of history between us. I am not writing to fix any of that. I am not sure it can be fixed, and I am not sure either of us would know what to do with it if it was. I am writing because I lost my dad this year, and losing him changed the way I see certain things, certain people, certain moments I have been carrying that I think I was carrying wrong. I think about that night in Los Angeles. I think about what happened on the court. And I want you to know, and I mean this in the plainest way I know how to say it, I do not hold it against you. I think we were both carrying things that were heavier than either of us ever let anyone see. Things that had nothing to do with basketball and everything to do with who we were underneath it. You are doing good work, real work, the kind that matters when the cameras are gone. I hope you are doing okay. Dr. Okonkwo finished reading. The office was very quiet. Outside, somewhere down the hall, she could hear the sound of children arriving for the morning program. Sneakers on linoleum, voices overlapping, a ball bouncing once against a wall. Isiah Thomas sat with the letter for a long time. Then he folded it, slowly, along the original creases. Ari, the way you fold something you intend to keep, and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He didn't say anything for nearly a full minute. Dr. Okonkwo waited. Finally, he looked up, and the thing on his face had settled into something she could name now. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something older and quieter than gratitude. It was the look of a man who had been carrying a weight for 3 years and had just been told, by the last person he would have expected, that the weight was not entirely his to carry alone. He said, "How does he know about the West Side work?" She said, "I don't know." He nodded slowly. "Tell whoever told him," he said. "Thank you." She never found out who had told Michael. Raymond Whitmore, Marcus's cousin, the one whose family connection threaded quietly through this entire story, believed it was Marcus himself. But Marcus, when asked, only smiled and said he didn't remember exactly how word got around. Some things, Raymond said, are allowed to stay a little mysterious. Isiah Thomas never wrote back, as far as anyone knows. But something changed after that day. Dr. Okonkwo noticed it gradually, the way you notice a change in weather. Not in one single moment, but across many small moments that you only understand later when you look back at them together. When Isiah spoke to the children at the community center, to whatever group happened to be there, 10 or 20 or sometimes nearly 50 kids sitting on the gymnasium floor looking up at him, he began ending every session with the same words. He would look out at all those young faces, children who had grown up in the same streets he had grown up in, children carrying the same weight of a world that was not going to make things easy for them. And he would say quietly and clearly, as though he had been thinking about it for a long time before he said it, "The people who push you hardest might be the ones who believe in you most." A pause. Don't be too proud to see that. Dr. Okonkwo heard him say it dozens of times over the years. She always wondered if he was talking about Michael Jordan. She asked him once, very carefully, near the end of a long afternoon when the building was mostly empty and the light through the gymnasium windows had gone the particular warm gold of late Chicago afternoon. He looked at her for a moment, then he smiled. Not the famous Isiah Thomas smile, the big, bright, opponent, unnerving, megawatt one. A smaller one, private, real. "I'm talking about everyone," he said, and walked back down the hall. "There is a park in Chesapeake, Virginia, that most people drive past without looking at. The asphalt is cracked down the middle, split open by years of summer heat and winter cold that no one ever bothered to fix. One of the backboard supports leans very slightly to the left, not enough to affect the game, but enough that you notice it when the morning light hits it at a certain angle. The nets are the chain link kind that makes a metallic sound when the ball passes through them that is entirely different from the soft swish of fabric. Louder, more honest somehow. In the early morning, before the neighborhood wakes up, before the children arrive with their backpacks and their noise and their beautiful, ordinary energy, a man comes here alone. He brings a basketball. He shoots by himself. He doesn't count makes or misses. He doesn't keep any kind of score. He just moves through the rhythm of it, the setup, the release, the follow-through, the retrieval. The way a person moves through a thing they have done so many times it has become part of breathing. His name is Marcus Whitmore. He is in his early 60s now. His hair is gray at the temples. His knees ache on cold mornings in a way they did not used to. But his shot is still clean. His form is still the same form he built in this same park when he was 11 years old. Holding a TV antenna in place with one hand and watching basketball players move on a small fuzzy screen and deciding that he was going to understand this game the way nobody else did. He never made the NBA. He coached middle school basketball for 30 years instead. He has sent hundreds of children into the world with something. A work ethic, a sense of themselves, a knowledge of what it feels like to be part of something larger than yourself. Some of those children went on to play in college. A few went further. None of that is small. None of that is second best. Marcus Whitmore, standing alone in a cracked park at 7 in the morning, he knows that with the quiet certainty of a man who has spent a lifetime being exactly who he is. When his cousin Raymond finally told him the whole story, the handshake, the open microphone, the 4 words, the letter that arrived 3 years later, Marcus sat in the chair across from Raymond at the kitchen table and did not speak for a long time. He just sat with it. The way Darlene Whitmore had taught all her children to sit with things, completely without rushing toward a response, letting the weight of something settle into you before you decided what to carry and what to set down. Then he said something that Raymond has repeated many times since, because he says he cannot find better words for what this story is actually about. Marcus said, "My mama used to say that the bravest thing a person can do, the hardest thing, the rarest thing, is to wish somebody well when they've just hurt you." He looked at the table for a moment. She said most people can be kind to someone who has been kind to them. That's easy. That's just trading. But to look at someone who has just done you wrong, who has just stood in front of 20,000 people and turned their back on your open hand and feel something gentle toward them? She said that's the whole game. That's the whole point of being a person. He was quiet for another moment. Then, "I think Michael Jordan is braver than people give him credit for." So let's talk about why. Because that is the question that has been sitting at the bottom of this whole story, patient and still, since the very first page. Why would Michael Jordan, a man whose competitive fury was so legendary that teammates described it as sometimes frightening, a man who turned to being cut from a high school team into 3 decades of relentless excellence, a man who by every account held his grudges with both hands and never let go easily, why would that man, in the most triumphant moment of his entire career, feel something as quiet and unguarded as concern for the enemy who had just publicly humiliated him? There are 3 answers. All of them are true. All of them matter. The first answer is the simplest. Michael Jordan was raised by Dolores Jordan, and Dolores Jordan taught her children that dignity is not something other people can take from you. It is something you carry in yourself, and it only disappears if you choose to put it down. When Isiah walked away from that extended hand, Michael's pride felt the sting of it. Of course it did, he was human. But his dignity did not follow Isiah out the door. It stayed right where it was, in his chest, steady and unbroken. And from that place of steadiness, something else became possible, something other than rage. The second answer is harder and more painful. Michael Jordan knew what it felt like to be the man walking away. Not from a handshake. He would never do that. But from something just as real. He knew what it felt like to be so proud and so hurt and so unable to process what was happening inside you that the gracious choice became impossible. He had felt it on a basketball court many times. He had felt it after playoff losses that should have broken him. He had felt it in the quiet of his own locker room, sitting alone by his bag, unable to speak. When he looked at Isiah Thomas turning away, he was not looking at a villain. He was looking at a mirror. A man carrying something too heavy to set down in public. A man whose pride had become a kind of prison and who could not find the door. Michael had lived in that prison too. He just found his way out sooner. And the empathy that came from knowing that, the recognition of one suffering person in the face of another, was what produced those 4 quiet words. Not a speech, not a declaration, just 4 words slipping out into an open microphone like water finding the only crack available. I hope he's okay. The third answer is the one that Raymond Whitmore believes most completely, the one that took him 20 years of sitting with the story to arrive at. Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player who ever lived, was made greater by Isiah Thomas. Think about it. The Jordan rules, the 3 years of losses, the bruising and the double teams, and the refusal to let Michael simply be brilliant and have it be enough. All of it, every hard foul, every tactical humiliation, every spring elimination, forced Michael and his team to grow into something they could not have become any other way. The bad boys didn't just beat the Bulls, they built them. Isiah Thomas, in all his complicated, difficult, sometimes infuriating glory, was a necessary part of what Michael Jordan became. You cannot become the greatest without being tested by the best, and Isiah Thomas for 3 years was the best test Michael Jordan ever faced. Maybe Michael understood that. Maybe it came to him all at once in that confetti-filled arena. This deep, unwanted, completely true realization that the man walking away from his hand had done as much to make him a champion as any coach, any teammate, any sunrise practice session in an empty gym. If that realization landed on him in that moment, and Raymond Whitmore believes it did, then what Michael Jordan felt for Isiah Thomas was not just concern, it was something closer to gratitude. A complicated, private, unexpressible gratitude. And he offered in the only way available to a man standing at the top of the world with confetti in his hair and a microphone 3 feet away. 4 words. I hope he's okay. Not, I beat you. Not, look what you missed. Not, now the whole world sees what I always knew. Just, I hope you're okay. Marcus Whitmore goes back to that park most mornings that the weather allows. He shoots his quiet shots in the quiet morning light. He does not keep score. He does not perform for anyone. He is simply a man with a basketball and a cracked court and 60-something years of living inside a game he loves. Sometimes, he says, he thinks about the 2 boys, the one from Wilmington, North Carolina, 15 years old, crying in his room after being cut. His mother standing silently in the hallway, wise enough not to knock, and the one from the west side of Chicago, 3 years old when his father walked out the door. Watching his mother carry the weight of 9 children with her, back straight and her faith intact. 2 boys from different worlds who fell in love with the same game, who rose to the very top of it, who hurt each other in public for years and never once stopped long enough to ask each other the question that might have changed everything between them. The question that Michael Jordan finally asked, not with his voice, not on purpose, but with 4 unplanned, unguarded, completely honest words into an open microphone on the greatest night of his life. Are you okay? Marcus sets his feet. He lifts the ball. He releases it into the morning air with the same clean follow-through he has had since he was 11 years old. The chain net makes its metallic sound. He retrieves the ball. He sets up again. The neighborhood begins, slowly and all around him, to wake up. His name was Sergio Delgado. He was 12 years old on the night of June 12, 1991. Someone on the building staff had handed him a mop at the start of the evening and told him to stand near the sideline and be ready in case of spills. He had nodded very seriously, the way 12-year-olds nod when they are trying to look older than they feel. He did not mop anything that night. He just stood there, gripping the handle of that mop with both hands, watching the most extraordinary thing he had ever been close enough to touch. 20,000 people above him. Wow, the greatest basketball player alive, 30 feet away. Confetti beginning to fall from the rafters like something the building itself was celebrating. He was a 12-year-old boy who could not believe he was allowed to be this close to something this big. He saw the handshake, refused. He heard what Michael said. He spent a long time afterward, years honestly, wondering if he had imagined it, because it didn't make any sense, the way he understood the world at 12 years old. Michael Jordan was supposed to be angry, or loud with happiness, or coldly triumphant. He was supposed to feel something big and obvious and easy to name. Not that, not something that quiet, not something that worried. Sina de Burshiman, Tidurilaranayrna, Tidirarinawan. Sergio Delgado is in his early 40s now. Mike, he lives in Los Angeles. He coaches basketball at a high school where half the kids come from neighborhoods that remind him of where he grew up. Tight streets, loud families, futures that could go many different ways depending on 100 things no one entirely controls. He thinks about that night more than people would expect, about what it taught him about greatness, about what it taught him about people, about what it taught him about the difference between winning and being worthy of having won. About 30 years after that evening, his son, a 14-year-old named Mateo, long-limbed and serious the way some 14-year-olds are, came home from a basketball game with red eyes and tight shoulders. A teammate had said something cruel during the game, something that had cut through his skin and stayed there. Sergio sat with him at the kitchen table. He did not rush. He let Mateo feel it fully first, the way his own father had once let him feel things fully before trying to fix them. Then he told him the story, all of it, the handshake, the silence, the 20,000 people who stopped breathing all at once, Michael's hand in the air, Isiah's back, already turned, and the 4 words. Mateo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He thought about it for a moment, the way teenagers think when something has genuinely surprised them. Slowly, with the particular seriousness of a young person who does not want to arrive at the wrong answer. Then he said, Michael Jordan was worried about the guy who just dissed him? That's what I heard, Sergio said. I was 4 feet away. Matteo sat with that. I know, well, that's the most player thing I've ever heard, he said finally. Sergio laughed. The kind of laugh that is also, a little bit, the edge of something else. Then Matteo looked up and asked the question that had no clean answer. Did Isiah Thomas ever find out what Michael said? Sergio was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said honestly. Maybe, maybe not. And that is the truth. Nobody knows for certain. Maybe Isiah heard it through Raymond, or through the letter, or through some version of the story that filtered back to him across the years. Maybe one morning he opened a book or clicked on a podcast and heard 4 words that matched something he had never known was said. Or maybe he never found out. Maybe he went home that June night in 1991 believing that Michael Jordan despised him, or rather believing that he had had the last word, carrying that belief through all the hard years that followed, through the losses and the judgment and the long, slow work of becoming someone the world could see more fully, carrying it, and those 4 words existing quietly in the world all along, unclaimed, unheard, like a letter sent to an address the recipient had already left. This story does not have a perfect ending. Real ones never do. But somewhere in all that noise, the championships and the bad boys and the hard fouls and the confetti and the years and the grief and the letters and the children sitting on gymnasium floors listening to a man who knew what their pain felt like. Somewhere in all of it, there was one moment that was true and clean and completely human. A man at the very top of everything he had ever worked for. Me turning toward the person who had just hurt him and choosing, without thinking, without planning, without an audience, to feel something other than anger. 4 words, that is all. 4 words that nobody heard and everybody needed. I hope he's okay. And that is the story, not the one the newspapers told, not the one the radio hosts argued about over their morning coffee. The real one, the quiet one, the one that lived inside 4 words spoken into an open microphone on the greatest night of one man's career. Words full of something that pride is supposed to make impossible. Concern for an enemy at the top of the world. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. It does not matter if you are in Chicago or Detroit, London or Lagos, a big city or a small town with 1 stoplight. Yeah, we want to know, because stories like this one remind us that people are people everywhere, carrying things, hurting quietly, trying their best. And if this story moved you even a little, if it made you think differently about someone in your own life who has been hard to forgive, hit that like button right now. Not for us. Do it as a small act of the same thing Michael Jordan showed that night. A little kindness, offered without needing anyone to notice. And if you believe that more people in this world need to hear stories like this one, stories about what real strength looks like, stories that go deeper than the highlights and the headlines, then subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. Every single video we make is built the same way this one was, with care, with honesty, with the belief that the truth, when you finally hear it, is always more powerful than the story everyone agreed to tell instead. The video appearing on your screen right now continues the journey. Click it. You already know you want to. We will see you there.